What will be the future role of public space be? What are the new policies that public space needs?
I think this pandemic is challenging everything we thought we knew. And in the short term, I think it's strengthening inequality because it's not the same if you are locked inside in a good house with connection and you can continue working than if you are in a slum, in a crowded room without connection and having to do everything that you had for earning your life completely blocked now. And then that's one thing. The other thing is that there is a discussion about density we're talking about, and some people blame density as the most vulnerable urban form of organization. I heard the governor of Florida said that New York was a petri dish for coronavirus or something like that. And I'm not sure that is sustained in facts. And you can see that very dense cities like Seoul, Hong Kong, Singapore have been quite successful in dealing with coronavirus without locking everyone. We can discuss about privacy issues and how social networks are more or less subject to public authorities' intervention. But they have dealt quite well with that. So I'm not sure that density is an issue. Another thing is that we had an evolution in progress about connected activities. I don't know what is your experience. I had some platforms for lectures and virtual classes, and I have done some in the past, but now everyone has been forced to adapt to this new situation. And I think even after the lockdown, it will probably in some way continue. Also for telemedicine, for there is this story of online shopping, which on the one hand is something that you do from your cell phone or your computer, but on the other hand, it involves a lot of movements in the city, and perhaps the delivery guys are one of the most visible activities that continue during the pandemic. So we have done a research about that, and this is part of the book we are publishing, and I can share with you some short documentary films we have been doing about that. I think all the discussion about co-working spaces will probably change after that, because the home office perhaps will have a greater share of the time of people. But I'm not a futurologist. But anyway, the people that is, and then how some sort of public participation can go through these changes. No, I have been participating in a lot of webinars. People are trying to communicate with each other, to think about what is happening, and I think distance no longer matters. So you can share that with a lot of people spread across the world. And even parliaments are trying to continue working sometimes in a virtual way, sometimes in other, but I think this will not replace probably the physical meeting, but will be a complement of that could continue in the future. You know? And then there are this, of course, this will have huge economic consequences, and it will be hard to recover from that, especially in Argentina, which we were already in a crisis before. And on top of that, we have this that is affecting everyone. But at the same time, there are some collateral effects that are quite amazing. For instance, the quality of the air in Chinese cities, in India, and in our cities is much better. And the question is how those positive collateral effects that no public policy had been successful till now to move can continue in the future. And perhaps, and that is specific for public space, how all those factors can be gathered in a new approach for urban policies and also for public spaces. And perhaps the street is, I think it should always be considered as a public space. In fact, it's in some cities 80% of the public space beyond squares and more traditional public spaces. And if we can think as a possible step forward of different ways of moving on socially organizing our movements, perhaps we should have more room in the streets for other uses and better conditions for public spaces. In the short term, the public policies that are being thought in different governments, I think, is how to get out as fast as possible from this lockdown without compromising the health issues involved, no? And in order to do that, it means in the short term, better and more precise risk detection, tracing, which is also a subject of public policy in making a trade-off between privacy and public policy and oversight from data rights organizations and all that. And how there is a specific issue of health, public health here, and how public health systems are improved, but also how health conditions are better. No, this is part of the collateral issue I was talking about, and specifically, I think there are historical lessons for the cities. No, when there were the cholera, the pest, the yellow fever, and other diseases because of the sanitary systems. There were public policies for improving that, for sort of hygienic approach of the city. Some linked the modern movement of wide right-angled volumes to also a hygienistic step at the beginning, no, at the very beginning of the 20th century. So I think in the physical shape of cities, some sort of a better physical environment. And also that there is also a question of housing, no? Because everyone knows that some people are living below the minimum standards of quality. And that is something that is beyond architecture. But how can we consider those rights more seriously to improve better policies for that? In our countries, and you are interested in going around the world, so to talk something more specific, we have a bigger proportion of people living in sort of shanty towns, slums, and we are, on the one hand, I think it's good that we are accepting that the solution is not getting rid of those neighborhoods, but improving them. But I think some people were more or less satisfied with building some squares and painting the facades, but in the interior, it more or less remained the same. And I think that is not enough. No, this challenges us to be more assertive and to have better policies.
What will be the future role of our streets? What will be the new forms of human transportation?
And I think we have lived a long century of fossil energy, no? And then one of the consequences of all this is that the demand for oil shrink completely, and the prices are at unbelievable low levels now, without almost no historic precedent. And I think it is also a way of thinking beyond oil, no? For the future. And I think our streets are a legacy of different ages of the city. You know, we have streets from the walkable city, we have streets for the transit city with railways, tramways, and others, and we have streets for cars. And in Los Angeles, a lot, you know, and in many other cities. And I think we should be thinking the streets for the post-fossil era. And I don't know if the technological solutions divide. I think it's very interesting that there is a transition for car producers to go from oil to electric fuel energy. But I think it's not enough. And even the self-driving cars and all that. I see more future, even if that is interesting, in a better organization of mobility, of the reasons that make that you want to go from a place to another, for the times to do that, and how the city coordinates those movements, and how you can solve when you go somewhere is because you really need to do something physically there, no? And then I think this could give more room for the streets. But I was reading, there are reasons to be optimistic, but some reasons to be pessimistic too. We have an extraordinary situation now. It's like we have stopped the world for a while, the world that we knew, and we have the illusion that when we start again, we can start differently, and having learned that it was possible to change something we never thought that could be changed. But it could be that we start again and we forget everything. We have done that in the past. And then, for instance, when there are so many cars parked now and not occupying the circulation of the street, and there is no traffic, you thought that the bikes and the motorcycles would be more comfortable in the street. But for some reason, I don't know, there are many on the sidewalks competing with the few pedestrian spaces we have. And, but that is an anecdotal observation. But I also read about Amartya Sen, the Nobel Prize, talking about, for instance, out of the Second World War, the Great Britain was able to do the national health system and find out of this mobilization a completely new devices. But what is sure is that we are going to come out of this situation in a worse situation that we were before. And then going back to the policies needed to overcome all that, we need a strong political will, and it's a possibility, but we should do everything for that possibility to become a fact.
Can we imagine a city without cars, private cars, and what is the role of the public transportation in terms of social distancing?
I think we can imagine that would be the most radical outcome. But I think in some European cities, you see the pictures of the 60s and 70s completely crowded by cars, even the public squares, the Plaza de Comercio in Lisbon, or everywhere. And then now there are almost no cars in the inner cities. But it's true that the peripheries are still car dependent. I would be happy if we had a much less car-dependent world, and if it's without cars, much better. But perhaps and I think that there are some signs of that. For instance, a generation ago, when one was 18 or 16, depending on where, the expectation of having a car, of driving, was very strong. And now it might be a necessity, and but it's not such a powerful will as it was in the past. And I think that is an encouraging sign. But it depends also on public policies, and I think also on economic incentives. If you consider all that you have to spend for making a car available in the city, the externalities, and the weight in a personal or familiar budget, you could have incentives to be smarter in the use of your money if you have other possibilities of going to where you might need to go. But also, it also means a way of organizing the cities, for making possibilities available without the necessity of the car. I think if you invest a lot of public transportation, if you make it available, if you find ways of having different means for different needs in the city, you make them safe, you make them proper, you make them comfortable, reliable, and all that, well, they could be more attractive. And for having the money for that, I think what New York did recently to have a congestion charge, like in London, to go into Manhattan, and with that revenue to pay for the improvement of the metro system. Well, and other cities have done that in the past, and I think to use also market incentives to penalize a little bit more what we don't want to encourage, and to have more money available for what we want to encourage in the future is one way. And how to frame a possible new way of organizing the cities. Some people, like in Paris, they talk about the 15-minute city, and to have everything 15 minutes walking around. And I think that is a nice idea, but also something that doesn't take into account that in large metropolitan areas, you will never have everything 15 minutes walking around, no, because you go to more specialized places and all that. And I think you should combine mass transit, walking, more biking, and sometimes lighter vehicles for bridging the different gaps. And perhaps without cars, or much less dependent on cars. On the other hand, the companies like Google or Facebook or all that are more present than ever, and even Netflix. So there will be a different approaches to the global world.
What should be the role of technology, AI, in rethinking the possibilities for public space? Can AI be used to control parts of the city according to unexpected events?
I think this is a great question now, and it's also linked to the data networks, the 5G discussion, and how China is very strong at that, how other societies are more reserved about that. And I think the regulatory frameworks for data networks and telecommunication networks are evolving with the technology, which is changing very fast, perhaps faster than many other fields together with the information technology. And I think we are navigating uncharted waters now, because it's something quite new, and I think we value privacy a lot. And perhaps what is workable in some Asian countries and cities is not necessarily accepted in more Western societies. But I think, again, if you have to balance the cost of being completely locked and to be able to move with some access to your data, if it's correctly controlled by some public civic society oversight, perhaps we should discuss that. I wouldn't accept to be completely invaded in my privacy. I know that I am already invaded a little. Google, Facebook, and all that know everything about us, or a lot about us, and how a public space of data is governed. And I think this is a challenge for a democratic society, and not being nostalgic about the past, because it will be no longer like that. And in that case, the surveillance is uncomfortable, and perhaps to frame the question in a positive way is how to make public spaces safe for us, and well, there were the concerns about crime, the concerns about the environment, the concerns about data privacy, but how to be positive about that, how which are the public spaces we want to live, and how they interact with us in the human scale. And I think that is a challenge for design too, and I don't know, when we were discussing that in Italy a few years ago, and the Italian cities, as you know, are one of the most beautiful ones in the center, and the peripheries are one of the ugliest ones, because the way that they have been being produced. And when they discuss how to change the awful peripheries, they say, well, they will never be like the historical centers, because the city now is being produced in another way. And perhaps the challenge is to discuss how the way of producing the city with the contemporary trends can give a better environment without being nostalgic and without accepting as unchangeable the ugly consequences of something that we live in our built environments. I think there is a temptation for authoritarian regimes to control everything. If they always like that, now they have the opportunity and the justification to do that, but I think public space, if we can ask ourselves how the meaning of public space can evolve, I think there will always be public spaces like the ones we know, squares, streets, and a lot of semi-private or transition between public and private that I think are very interesting. Like some of them completely threatened now, like the bars and restaurants and some sort of commerce, but I think they are a way of dealing with one another. The living rooms of our houses have become a sort of public space for this sort of communication. But I think it's very interesting to think about how public and private spaces combined, no? Like that is the magic of the street, because you have the facade, the windows, the doors, and the ways of going in and out, and all those spaces in the middle. Perhaps the model of the big shopping malls, which were conceived in a sort of way as a public space, can evolve now. The role of commerce in the avenues with the growth of electric commerce, it can change. But I think the physical qualities of public space, of vegetation, of landscape, on what can give us some sort of emotion of meeting other people, that will remain. But we have to combine the existing cities, which could change in the way of working, in moving around and organizing activities, and the new urbanizations to be built, taking into account all this. And perhaps there is a big challenge for spaces for education, no? Perhaps in the universities we can deal a little bit better with these social virtual exchanges, but we still need, if we can, some physical meeting. I think for the youngest, the kids, is more difficult. Every father is being challenged. I mean, you are probably having to do the homework and to go that, but probably elementary schools will not change that much, but we could think the space of higher education perhaps differently, no? And with some consequences for the public spaces. But I think we can think about a different way of using the space, no? I read somewhere that the offices for research, or before this, had 70% of the time the workplaces empty, because people were around in another way, with a computer somewhere else, or in a laboratory, in a library, etc. So perhaps there are some leads to think about how we can project that and think about that in the future. And I think public space is part of that. You know? I don't know. I think the developers and the real estate are now desperate because no one is buying anything. But I'm interested to know what they think about the future too, because there will be a need for something else.
Yeah.
And how public developers work, and the ones that are responsible for social housing and all that.